Good morning. We're starting the share in Likkutei Sichos for the project Likkutei Sichos, the second Sicha for Parshas Ba'aloischa, volume 18, Chelek Yud Ches, page 104. This is a Sicha that was actually not said all at once. It's a compendium of Sichos that the Rebbe spoke during the entire month of Nisan in the year 1977, Tafshin Lamed Zayin. What was unique about that year is that Erev Pesach was Shabbos, similar to this year. So the majority of the Sichos throughout the month of Nisan discussed the concept of Erev Pesach being on Shabbos and the first Seder being on Motzei Shabbos. So after the Rebbe said all these Sichos throughout the month, they were compiled, edited, and then published as a single Sicha in Likkutei Sichos. Von die Chilukim zwischen dem Korban Pesach was man gebracht in Mitzrayim, among the differences between the Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering that was brought while the Jews were still in Egypt, and the Korban Pesach was mit gebracht a Jahr nach dem in Midbar, and then the Korban Pesach that the Jews brought the following year, the first year out of Egypt, the first Korban Pesach that they brought while they were in the desert, wegen welchen es wird erzählt in unser Parsha, about which we read in our current Parsha, Parshas Ba'aloischa. The Torah says, "Vayasu bnei Yisrael as Pesach b'moedei," that the Jews performed the ritual of the Korban Pesach at its appropriate time, on the 14th of Nisan, and that is referring to the first year after they left Mitzrayim, after they left Egypt. So there are several differences between the Korban Pesach that they did in Egypt and the Korban Pesach that they did while in the desert. Pesach Mitzrayim hat man gebracht b'mei Shavua. The first Korban Pesach, the Korban Pesach that the Jews brought that they offered while they were still in Egypt, was done on a weekday, b'choil. The actual exodus from Egypt occurred on Thursday. So the 14th of Nisan was the day prior, on Wednesday. However, the Korban Pesach that was offered in the wilderness, in the desert, was brought on Shabbos. As is discussed in the order of creation. As Rosh Chodesh Nisan from Yenim Yor, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of the month of Nisan that year is given Rishon L'Maaseh Bereishis, was on a Sunday. Kumteis, therefore, as Yud Aleph Nisan is given Shabbos. Therefore, we must say that the 14th of Nisan was on Shabbos. So that first year that they were free, that they were in the desert and no longer in Egypt, that first Korban Pesach that they offered was brought on Shabbos. Erev Pesach that year, that first Pesach out of Egypt was on Shabbos. That's the first difference. That the first Korban Pesach was brought on a weekday, and the second Korban Pesach was offered on Shabbos. Beis, the second difference. By Pesach Mitzrayim is the Iker Hadgasha Geven der Yachid. The focus of the first Korban Pesach, the Korban Pesach that was offered in Mitzrayim, was the individual. Yet der Yachid, every individual or bias, every household, hat Aleph Alein Geton Ala Avedis HaKorban. Every individual had to perform all steps of the korban themselves. And Beis, by Zichin Shtub, it occurred in every person's home. So first of all, it wasn't done by the Kohanim. It was done by each individual, all the steps of the offering of the korban. And second of all, it was done in every person's individual home. It wasn't brought to the Mishkan. It wasn't brought to the temple. As the Torah says with regard to the first Korban Pesach, every individual received the blood, sprinkled the blood on their doorposts and so on. The Korban Pesach that was brought in the desert had to be brought specifically in the Mishkan, in the temple. But this is mitzaref ala karbanis from ala eden. That is by doing so, by them all bringing their korban, by bringing their offering in the Mishkan, in the temple, that combined the offerings of all Jews. Balosh Nashas, as the Gemara says, they were brought together in groups. The only way the Korban Pesach was valid once they left Egypt was if it was brought everybody together, people coming together in honor of the holiday. And that's why the Korban Pesach in the desert, as opposed to the Korban Pesach in Egypt, was referred to a communal offering. So in Egypt, it was a private, individual, personal offering, and in the desert, once they left Egypt, it became a communal offering. This teaches us also with regards to Korban Pesach that was observed that after the Torah was given. And how both of these differences are dependent on each other. The fact that the Korban Pesach outside of Egypt was done on Shabbos, and how the Korban Pesach outside of Egypt was a communal offering rather than a private, personal, individual offering. Thus was Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos. The fact that Korban Pesach, offering the Korban Pesach, overrides the laws of Shabbos is der Fall, was das is a Korban Tzibur, is because it is a communal offering. The Gemara sagt in Psachim, the Gemara in Tractate Psachim describes a fascinating event. Pam echos chol yudalad liyas b'Shabbos. It occurred once that the 14th of Nisan fell out on Shabbos. And the language that the Gemara uses implies that it wasn't frequent, it wasn't a very common occurrence for the 14th of Nisan to be on Shabbos, for Erev Pesach to be a Shabbos. Shachachu. And people forgot, v'lo yadu in Pesach teiches a Shabbos imlav, and they didn't remember if offering the Korban Pesach overrides Shabbos or not. It was a conundrum. While halacha zu nis alma, the Gemara says that they forgot this law. From the Bnei Beseira, the Nisim, the leaders of the Jews at the time were Bnei Beseira, and they forgot these laws. It was intentionally concealed from them. As we'll see later why it was important for this law to be concealed from Bnei Beseira at the end of the Sichos. Hat Hillel gesagt, Hillel, who had recently arrived from Babylonia, he made a statement. He says, "V'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu b'shana shadeiches Shabbos." Is there only one Korban Pesach a year that overrides Shabbos? V'lo yaharba yoser mimasayim psachim yesh lanu b'shana. There are more than 200 Pesach-like offerings that are offered during the year, shadeiches Shabbos, and they override Shabbos. But mit psachim meint that the Korban is tzibur. Obviously, there's only one Korban Pesach. So when Hillel said that there's more than 200 Korban Pesachs, he was referring to the general concept of a Korban Tzibur, a communal offering. There are more than 200 opportunities to offer a communal offering on Shabbos. Korban Tamid, the daily offerings twice a day, Musaf and the Musaf offering. So between about 50 Shabbos a year and Rosh Chodesh that falls out on Shabbos, and Yantif that falls out on Shabbos, and so on, there are many different opportunities for a Korban Tzibur, a communal offering, to be brought on Shabbos. So Hillel says that just like any communal offering is brought on Shabbos, the Korban Pesach should also be offered on Shabbos. And then the Gemara continues, as I learned this up, Hillel then uses what's called a Gzeira Shava, where he finds a word in one context and finds a similar word in a different context and applies the laws from one situation to the other. So with regard to general Korbanos Tzibur, general communal offerings, the Torah says Moyadei, that they have to be brought on a specific day. And the Torah uses the same word with regards to Korban Pesach, that it has to be brought on a specific day. And that's how we know that a Korban Pesach is offered on Pesach as well, on Shabbos as well. So we have these two times that it says Moyadei, and that teaches us that the Korban Pesach is offered on Shabbos as well. Nochman refers this in Yerushalmi. The Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, has a slightly different version, but it's a lot more concise and a lot clearer. What the Gir says, as Hillel had gesagt, the way the Talmud Yerushalmi describes Hillel's response is Hoyel v'tamid Korban Tzibur. He said very clearly, because the Korban Pesach is Hoyel v'tamid Korban Tzibur, because the daily offering, the perpetual daily offering, is considered a communal offering. Pesach Korban Tzibur, and the Korban Pesach is also a communal offering. Ma Tamid Korban Tzibur Deicha Shabbos, and just like the daily offering, which is a communal offering, overrides Shabbos, Af Pesach Korban Tzibur Deicha Shabbos, and therefore also the Korban Pesach, which is also a communal offering, will also override Shabbos. So that's how we know that the Korban Pesach is offered even when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. Sis ken kashenit. From them was the Gemara sagt that we cannot ask this following question. The Rebbe anticipates the question. It says, don't ask this question. The Gemara says, the Gemara says that there's a general rule that any offering that has a specific date that has to be offered on a particular day, then it overrides Shabbos. And as I post Paskin the Rambam, and Maimonides rules like that also, that any offering that the Torah says has to be brought on a certain date, regardless of whether it's a Korban Yachid, a personal offering, or a Korban Tzibur, a communal offering, is always brought on Shabbos. But this is the Das Rabbi Meir. That is the opinion of Rabbi Meir in this discussion in Psachim. In Tumura. But according to the Tanakama, the first opinion in that Mishnah is nit totally in zamani kavur. It does not depend on the offering being required to be brought on a specific date, nor in the minyan from tzibur, but rather on it being a communal offering. The Tanna Kama says that communal offerings override Shabbos, but personal offerings do not override Shabbos. So we see from here that the opinion of Rabbi Meir is that the reason the Korban Pesach overrides Shabbos is because it has a set date. But according to Tanna Kama, the reason it overrides Shabbos is because it's a communal offering. And from them, Guva was by the Bnei B'Seira and Hillel, and because there was this debate between Bnei B'Seira, the leaders of the Jews at the time, and Hillel. And so also there was a debate, as we'll see later in greater detail, between the sages Rabbi Yoshe and Rabbi Yonasan, as we'll explain in chapter 4. Is given a shakla v'tarya to Korban Pesach is derech Shabbos. So their debate was whether Korban Pesach overrides Shabbos. Is muchach. The fact that this debate exists and occurred, as they halten with the Tanna Kama, seems that they hold like Tanna Kama. Rabbi Meir is of meikara nit cannot have a shayla. The fact that they had to debate this means that everybody holds like Tanna Kama and not like Rabbi Meir, because if they would have held like Rabbi Meir, there would have never been any debate. Everybody would have right away said that has to be brought. The Torah says that it has to be brought on a specific date, and therefore it overrides Shabbos. While Korban Pesach is Manei Kavua. Korban Pesach is a type of offering that has a set date. So both Bnei B'Seira and Hillel, as well as Rabbi Yoshe and Rabbi Yonasan, who we'll discuss later, are of the opinion that the reason something would override Shabbos, the reason why an offering would override Shabbos, is only if it's a communal offering and nothing to do, or not only related to it being an offering with a set date. She's no, we could say though, and we have to say that even according to Tanna Kama, who says that it depends on it being a communal offering, there is also an element of it being a set offering, also tonight's study, as a side, almost unrelated condition for it to be allowed to be brought on Shabbos. As far as a par helam davar shel tzibur nideicha Shabbos, there is a sin offering that's brought by the Sanhedrin, by the High Court. If they rule something erroneously, if they rule that something is permissible when it turns out that it is not permissible, and everybody followed their ruling and sinned, obviously unintentionally, so now they need to bring a carbon. The Sanhedrin, the High Court, needs to bring a special sin offering, called par helam davar. It's a communal offering. But since there is no set date that this carbon has, that this offering needs to be brought, it does not override Shabbos. So it's a communal offering, but it can wait till Sunday. It's considered a communal sin offering. You don't have a community greater than the entire people of Israel. Nevertheless, this carbon does not override Shabbos. Now going back to our discussion about Korban Pesach. Von Pesach Mitzrayim, was is given a Korban Yachid und given b'mei Shavua. Based on the events in Egypt, when they did Korban Pesach for the first time, and it was a personal individual offering. Everybody brought their own carbon, and it was done during the week, on a weekday. That teaches us that generally a personal individual offering does not override Shabbos. The Pesach that they observed in the desert did occur on Shabbos. The Korban Pesach, Erev Pesach was on Shabbos. In dem Öfen is Nicker, as in dem Korban Pesach hat sich aufgetan, der Ingen von Zibur, und der Fahrer kann es durch sein Shabbos. So that was when this new concept came into play, that Korban Pesach also has an aspect of it being a communal, a Korban Tzibur. And that's why it did override Shabbos that time. So if we only looked at the events in Egypt, Korban Pesach would seem to be a Korban Yachid, a individual offering, and therefore would not override Shabbos. And then a year later, we learn about the Korban Pesach that they observed in the desert, and we read that it was done on Shabbos, and therefore we must say that it now became a communal offering. Hagam as Pesach Midbar v'Deres. Hot didn't get there from Korban Tzibur. Now, although the Korban Pesach that was offered in the desert and in all future generations has in it primarily an aspect of being a communal offering, it is not fully a communal offering. Adrab. In fact, there are many details that point to the opposite. In essence, it really is a personal, individual offering. Jeder Chavura darf bringen a besondere Korban von seiner Mammon. Every group, every consortium of people coming together and bringing the Korban Pesach had to pay for it from their own money. It was a personal, private offering. It was not. They could not use communal funds for their Korban Pesach. And then each individual owner or a member of this group ate the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach, the entire purpose of the Korban Pesach was to consume it, to eat it at the Seder, that night, the first night of Pesach. And the only people that are allowed to eat the Korban Pesach are members of that particular group. And many other issues that point to it being a private, personal, individual korban. These are all details in a korban yachid, that the individual eats it, he has to pay for it, and no one else can partake in it, only people that are members, and so on. There is the additional overarching detail over here that the Korban Pesach is also a Korban Tzibur, a communal offering, in that it has to be brought together with everybody else. It can only be brought at the same time that everybody else is also offering their Korban Pesach. The Gimel Kittas has to be slaughtered in groups. Drei Kahals, there has to be at least 3 groups or 3 groups of 30, as the Mefarshim say. So there has to be large groups. But at the same time, these large groups are all made up of smaller groups, and each small group is made up of individuals. So you have what seems to be the primary component over here, that it's a korban yachid, but at the same time, it's very much dependent on it being a korban tzibur, a communal offering, without which the individual offering is almost meaningless. Das heißt, Korban Pesach is koilel in sich gedarren von sei korban yachid. So what all this means is that Korban Pesach contains within it details that make it a private offering, inside Korban Tzibur, and also details that make it a communal offering. In addition, even more so, it is a these details that make it a private offering or a communal offering are not independent details. One thing makes it this and one thing makes it that. Nor in the gidrei hayachid, within it being a private personal offering, and you find the same details that make it a communal offering. And same is conversely. In the tzibur shaboy, by looking at the community aspect of it, you also find and you'll discover how it is also a individual personal offering. What are those details? As we said, the Korban Pesach, Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering has to be purchased with its personal funds. And its entire purpose is only for it to eventually be consumed, to be eaten, and only members are allowed to eat it. That's why every group must have its own korban. But at the same time, all these groups need to be doing the Korban Pesach at the same time, all Jews together. But on the other hand, the Korban Pesach, and although the Korban Pesach was offered as groups and as a community and everybody together, it wasn't everybody coming together as one group. Nor begimel kittas, there were 3 groups. That says, even after we combined and we brought everybody together as one large group, there still is division and detail and various degrees. The Gimel Kittas Dafka had to be specifically within 3 groups, and as the Gemara says, there was a doubt whether there was 3 general groups, or within each group you had to have 3 groups. Yeder from Zeh, Gimel Malkal, every group had to have a minimum of 30 people, so you have 3 minyanim within each group, so that we were sure that we're doing it correctly. But the bottom line is that it had to be individuals, it had to be communal, and both of those aspects had to come together at the same time. This will also explain the debate between Bnei B'seira and Hillel. Korban Pesach is deiche Shabbos underneath, whether Korban Pesach overrides Shabbos or not. Because Korban Pesach contains within it both elements, Saif and Yochid and Saif and Tzibur, both of personal and communal. is dan ort zu dan sein. There's room for discussion. There's room for the debate. Welche von sie is der Iker und der Machria? Which one is primary? Which one is most significant? Is it the fact that it was brought as an individual offering? Was dan is there niddeche Shabbos? In which case it would not override Shabbos. Other than tzibur shabai, or the communal aspect within it was dan at der Shabbos, and that's at that point it is strong enough to override Shabbos. And that's the debate between Bnei B'Seir and Hillel. What's the primary significant aspect of Karban Pesach? An additional proof that this is in fact what the argument was. Von dem was in Sifri auf dem Pasuk, in the Medrash Sifri, when it quotes the verse, when the Jews observed Pesach for the first time in this parsha, they quote as Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan and mechulek in them. Two sages, Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan, have a similar debate. Whether or not Karban Pesach overrides Shabbos. Rabbi Yeshe learned up from B'mayadai. Rabbi Yeshe uses the word B'mayadai to teach us as Karban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos. Kedas Hillel, like Hillel said, that because the Torah says B'mayadai, it has to happen, it has to occur on a specific date. That is proof that the Karban Pesach overrides Shabbos. When Rabbi Yonasan says, he says that's not enough of a proof to tell me that it has to be done on the actual date if it's Shabbos. As mechanic uplearning from B'moed, as Karban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos, Kedas B'nei B'Seir. So Rabbi Yonasan says that the word B'moyadoi is not strong enough to compel us to say that Karban Pesach has to be brought even when Erev Pesach is Shabbos, and that is the opinion of B'nei B'Seir. Because this point, which is most significant, which is stronger, the yachid or prat, whether it's the individual, the details, other the tzibur klal, or the community, or the general concept, is in kama mekaymes the nikudas hamachlokes from Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan. Because this general approach is found in other debates between these same two sages, Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan. Again, whether the individual or the details are primary, or the community and the general is more significant, is mistaver as das is the yesod from their plukte beneged to Karban Pesach. We must say that this is also the background and the perspective that leads them to their debate over here in the issue of Karban Pesach being offered on Shabbos. So now we're going to list 7 or 8 arguments in the Gemara and in the Braisos between Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan, and the Rabbi is going to draw a comparison between all of them, how all of them follow the same perspective of Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan, which is primary. Rabbi Yeshe says that the individual is the primary, and Rabbi Yonasan says that the community, the other way around. Rabbi Yeshe says that the community is primary, and Rabbi Yonasan says that the individual is primary. So Rabbi Yonasan says that B'mayadei is not enough to tell you that it has to be done on that day. So we need another proof that it occurs, that it happens on Shabbos anyway. And because Rabbi Yonasan says that the individual is primary, there's no reason to override Shabbos. Dugma is from the pluktes zwischen Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan was azla l'shitase in the Nekuda Hanal. So now we're going to list several examples of this debate between Rabbi Yeshe and Rabbi Yonasan, all following their same opinions and their same perspectives as we had now in Karban Pesach by Bnei Adam. So first, we're going to start with a debate with regard to people, whether you count people as individuals or you count people as a group. Aleph, by Ir Hanidachas. So the first example is with regards to an Ir Hanidachas, a city of idol worshippers, and the Torah says that if everybody in the city worships idols, they need to be wiped out. Ad kama is Ir Hanidachas. So what consists of an Ir Hanidachas? What makes an Ir Hanidachas? How many people do you need for a city to be considered an Ir Hanidachas? Miyud va'ad kuf. From 10 to 100, Divrei Rabbi Yeshe. Rabbi Yeshe's opinion that an Ir Hanidachas is you need from 10 to 100 idolaters in the city. Rabbi Yonasan says that an Ir Hanidachas starts from 100 and it goes on until the majority of one tribe of Israel. Is Rashi Masbir the Tam Rabbi Yeshe? Rashi explains what Rabbi Yeshe's opinion is based on. He says, less than 10 people cannot be considered a city. Ir Hanidachas. It has to be, the Torah says it has to be a city, an ir anidachas, and anything less than 10, it can't be an ir. Utfei mimeya, and then more than 100, nafka miteres ir, it now no longer is considered an ir, v'havel etzibur, it becomes a community. Das heißt, this means that Rabbi Yeshua halt, azayin diktfei mimeya, Rabbi Yeshua says that once they reach more than 100, bakum they together from tzibur, and they now become a community rather than just a city. When Rabbi Yonasan halt, Rabbi Yonasan says no. As tfei mimeya zayin namatzius fun ir. After 100, then that's when they become a city. A kibbutz fun yechidim. A city, by definition, is a collection of individuals. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have one body. They don't become one unit. It's just a city where a lot of individuals live. And that goes on until the majority of the tribe. So Rabbi Yeshua says that after they reach the point of 100, they now become a tzibur. They now become a community, and therefore they're no longer an ir, and that's why they're no longer an ir anitachas. And Rabbi Yonasan says that once they reach 100, that's when they become an ir, and they're not a tzibur. Und die Hasbara in them. What does this mean? What's the background over here? By Rabbi Yeshua is tzibur machriya. So Rabbi Yeshua says that a tzibur is most significant. A community is most significant. The riber zeter tfei mimeya. Therefore, he considers anything that's more than 100 atal metzius from a tzibur. It now became a new entity. It's not a city anymore. It is now a community. Rabbi Yonasan's shita is, Rabbi Yonasan says as yachid is machriya because Rabbi Yonasan is all about the individual. Und therefore, bleibt es an ir. Therefore, after 100, it's still a city. Bis ruba shall shevet until the majority of a tribe. And the same applies to that middle ground from 10 to 100. Rabbi Yonasan says Rabbi Yonasan says that it's even less than a city. It's only individuals. You have 100 individuals that have nothing to do with each other. As is afil onit an ir. It's not even a city. And Rabbi Yeshua says it's von ein ir. And Rabbi Yeshua, who does elevate them to the next level of being an ir. So the way I guess the best way we can put this is that there are three levels in this scenario of Dir Anidachas. There's Yechidim, there's individuals, there's an ir, there's a city, and then there's a tzibur. Rabbi Yeshua says that you have individuals from 1 to 10, then from 10 to 100 you have an ir, and from 100 and on you have a tzibur. And Rabbi Yonasan says that there never really is a concept of a tzibur over here. It's always going to be a bunch of individuals who make up an ir from 100 and on. So that's the first instance of this machlekes, of this dispute between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan being applied to another scenario. Another instance by Mekal alav v'imay. The Torah discusses someone who curses his father and mother. The language in the Torah is as follows: Ish sheyikalav v'saviv v'simay. Any man who curses his mother or father, his father or mother. So the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Ein li ela avi v'imay. I only know from this that you have to curse your father and your mother, meaning both. But aviv shaloi imay, but your father without your mother, or your imay shaloi aviv, or cursing your mother without your father. Minayin, how do we know that you're chayav from that too? Talmud loymar. So then the Torah tells us an additional word: aviv imay kilo. He cursed his mother and his father, dam of boy, and therefore he has to be put to death. Aviv kilel imay kilo. He's put to death whether he cursed his father alone or he cursed his mother alone. Divrei Rabbi Yeshua. Again, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says that because the Torah added an additional line of imay kilel, that he cursed his mother and father, which means the Torah is repeating itself, it has to be teaching us something new. Which means that from the beginning of the verse, we would have assumed that they have to be both cursed in order for him to be liable. And from the second part of the verse, we learn that cursing each one on their own, or separately, or only one, is equally. A person would be equally liable. That's Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yonasan says, I don't need this extra teaching at the end of the verse, because from the beginning of the verse, I already know that it means both of them, whether together or individually. The only indication that they would have to be cursed together in order to be liable is had the verse said the word yachtav, which means together. And since the verse did not say the word yachtav, that means that the beginning of the verse already is very clear that it refers to cursing them individually. Rabbi Yeshua halt as man darf gucken auf your kalas of Visimoi als a klal. Rabbi Yeshua says that cursing your father and mother is a general rule. They refer to a partnership who brought this individual into the world. Had the verse not concluded that he cursed his mother and father, we would have had to say, as there is we would have been compelled to say that he is only liable if he cursed them both together. Rabbi Yonason says, as that each one, the father and the mother, are separate. Unless the Torah specifically tells us that they have to be cursed together. And that's why you don't need an extra teaching to teach us that cursing your parents individually, you would also be liable, because that's very clear from the opening line of the verse. So these are two examples of the machlokes of this debate between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonason with regard to people being included in a general group or as individuals. Then there's been a kachim with regard to karbanos, with regards to things that belong to the temple. So the first one is, as we said earlier, carbon pesach, kanal. We discussed that at length, and we'll go into more detail later. Another one, dalid, oilas oif, an offering of a bird, bringing a bird as a carbon, as an offering to the temple. So the Torah says, when you bring a carbon, when you bring an offering to Hashem from cattle or from sheep, ma tamud loymar. What is this distinction over here mean? Why does the Torah delineate specifically cattle and sheep? Fish and nemar. Once the Torah says oilo, when the Torah says oilo, that is a burnt offering, this is referring now specifically to the wine libations that come along with every burnt offering. So the Torah says there are burnt offerings, gives you various examples: cattle, sheep, fowl, birds, and meal offerings. So with regards to cattle, the Torah says that there are libations. How do we know that a burnt offering that is brought from a bird offering does not have libation? So over here it says, if we only had the word oila with regard to libation, then we would assume that even a bird offering also also requires libation. So the Torah adds the words that libation only applies to offerings that are brought of cattle and sheep. That's Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. You don't need this extra teaching, because the Torah already clearly says zevach. The Torah says anything that is slaughtered, any animal that is brought as a korban, zevach implies shechted, slaughtered like you would slaughter an animal. The oif einay zevach, and a bird offering is not slaughtered in the same style as a regular animal offering. And mammals, birds, cows and sheep are slaughtered with a knife, and a bird is slaughtered with a thumbnail. So later Rabbi Yeshua is machriya dem was zevach ken geteilt werden, as es keul in sich kleibt zusammen alle sugim. Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is that the word zevach could actually include all the details, and that's the key over here. The inclusion of everything. Because even though the bird is slaughtered differently, but it qualifies as somewhat being slaughtered. Therefore, we need to have a specific exclusion for birds that a bird offering does not require libation. However, Rabbi Yonason's opinion is as the achra is like prat and zevach, that it depends on what the meaning of the word zevach means. And therefore, he says that it cannot be referring to a bird offering, the which is slaughtered with a thumbnail rather than with a knife. So therefore, Rabbi Yeshua, who goes by the general rule, says that when the Torah says zevach, it could in theory include birds also, and that's why the Torah has to exclude it specifically. And Rabbi Yonason says that when the Torah says zevach, it means only those that specifically qualify as zevach. But again, a moment. Now we have this same perspective with regards to money. A financial debate. By chomesh, with regards to someone who pledges something that belongs to him, anything that belongs to him. He pledges it to Hekdesh, he pledges it to the temple, and then he changes his mind, he wants to buy it back. So Torah says you can't just give an equal amount, an equal exchange. You have to add a fifth. You have to add 20% to your redemption. It's a penalty that they will see later that the Torah wanted to discourage people from doing that. So if you do end up doing it, you have to pay 20%. So what exactly is this 20%? The Torah says, "V'yasef chamishis alav." You have to add a fifth. Sheyehu v'choim shechamisha divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia's opinion is that after adding the penalty, it is then 20% of the new amount. So to use the an actual round figure, if you have 20, if the object that you are redeeming is valued at $20, if you want to redeem it now, you have to add $5, because after you add the $5, then that 5 is a fifth of the new amount. Rabbi Yonason says that's Rabbi Yoshia's opinion. Rabbi Yonason says that the fifth is 20%, a fifth of the principal, of the original amount. So in the case of a $20 redemption, you only need to add $4. So Rabbi Yoshia says that the principal and the penalty are combined as one, and the Rabbi Yonason says that the principal is kept by itself, is kept separate, and the penalty is kept separate. Rabbi Yoshia Rabbi Yoshia says that the fifth comes from outside of the capital, of the principal. And therefore, it's called a fifth, but really it's a quarter. It's a fifth of the new amount, of the combined principal and penalty. When Rabbi Yonason that the fifth comes from within, it's choim sheshel keren, it is a fifth, it's 20% of the principal. What is their argument based on? The Asbar and Zeir Plukta, to understand what they are debating over here. Keren v'choim is einen zwei besondere pratim. Principal and this new fifth, this new penalty, are two separate details. The keren is their iker tashlumin. The principal is the primary payment. When the chomish is haisafa, the fifth, the 20% over here is in addition. It's a penalty. But they do have something in common. When the person makes the payment, he brings them together. He doesn't write two separate checks, one for the principal and one for the penalty. He writes one check, one payment. So they're details, but they come together as one payment. And the Rabbi Yoshia's follows his opinion. He combines both details, and therefore the fifth comes from without. It's an external fifth that tzibur. She combines, or he communes. The Rabbi uses the language tzibur. As a community, he puts together the keren, the principal, and the penalty. Rabbi Yonason said, they're prat bazunder, but Rabbi Yonason views every detail individually, independently. And the riber is the shir from ein prat, then chemish. Therefore, when with this one detail needs to be determined how much it's going to be, how much the 20% is going to be, it's a chamish from the bazunder prat keren. It's 50. It's a fifth. It's 20% of this one detail of the keren, of the principle. Chemish milagav. It's an internal fifth from within.
Rambam's like the Rabbi Yeshia, right? The quarter.
Yeah, generally yes. Yeah. That's money. Now with time, similar approach between Rabbi Yeshia and Rabbi Yonason with regard to a dispute in time. But in the Geder von Zman by Egla Arufa, with regard to an Egla Arufa, as we know in Pasha Shoftim, the Torah says that if a corpse is found between two cities and we don't know who killed them, we measure the distance between the two cities, and the courts or the elders of the closest city have to bring a calf, and it's beheaded on a certain spot, and that spot that the calf is beheaded on may never be worked. It has to be remain fallow. The land has to remain unused forever. So this is a dispute, another dispute between Rabbi Yeshia and Rabbi Yonason, what that means. Asher le'yavid bo v'lo yizara. When the Torah says that it should not be worked and it should not be sowed, lisha avar divrei Rabbi Yeshia. Rabbi Yeshia says that it applies also to land that was never worked before, was never used before. So when finding a spot to behead this calf, we need to find a place that was never used before. It can't be something that was used in the past and will not be used in the future. It has to be something that was never used in the past as well. And Rabbi Yonasan says that the only thing we're concerned with now is that this land not be used in the future. The Gemara is mouse, but the Gemara explains as lahaba the kul amalei plig. Everybody agrees that in the future this land may not be used as matornit zereya zayin. So Rabbi Yeshua doesn't say only land that was not used in the past, but it could be used in the future. But rather he says, in addition to land not being used, in addition to this land not being used in the future, it may also not be land that was used in the past. Keep pligi l'sha'avar. Their argument is with regards to the past. That's barav in them. Similar explanation as all our other machlokes in between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yosef. Like we said earlier, in Zman zayin adot tzvei inyanim. Time also has two components. Aleph, the pratim in them. There are details within time, specifically avar, hoive, v'asid, past, present, and future. And Beis, the other component in time is the klal fun zman, the general concept of time. Klolos hemshech hazman, how time is one long continuum. Ein zusammenschluss von avar, hoive, v'asid is one continuum of past, present, and future. Rabbi Yeshua is mitzaref al zusammen. Rabbi Yeshua combines them all together. Mitzad klolos hemshech hazman zayin and avar, hoive, v'asid ein inyan. Rabbi Yeshua says that as far as time is concerned, past, present, and the future are one unit. Der Riber sagt as der Tanai. Therefore, the condition about this land, asher lo yavad b'lo v'lo yizara, that it may not be worked or plowed, is in, or sowed, is in tzibur v'tzir of hemshech hazman. Again, the Rebbe uses the word tzibur, that all this time now is combined together as one, and it includes also the past. Rabbi Yonasan aber kocht auf the pratim. Rabbi Yonasan again is about the details, specifics, individuals. Von Zman, the details of time. The yeder prat, how every detail of over, of past, present, and future is a bazunder inyan. Every detail now is its own unit. When the riber is again nor to masid lahaba. Therefore, when the Torah says it should not be used, this land should not be used, it's referring only to the future unitim avar and not the past. So these are 6, including the Karban Pesach, scenarios where Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan's argument can be, or their general perspective can be applied to their different arguments. We have a few more coming soon. First of all, as we mentioned many times, whenever we find a similar argument based on a similar perspective from Chazal, when the Gemara or the Mishnah or the Braisa or the Medrash lists an argument between two sages, and these arguments follow their perspective, and it's listed each time. We have to find a need in yeder funzeh. What does a need mean over here? It means that had it not been mentioned in this particular context, we would have not necessarily have known that the same opinion or the same perspective applies here. Had it not been mentioned, if there is no tzrichas, if there is no specific need to mention this machlekes, this dispute between the same two sages, then we could have easily learned or deduced from other places that this would be their opinion, as in fact the Rebbe does in many sichos. We could have easily learned it from other places. The same applies over here also. The Rebbe is now going to tell us how in each of these disputes between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan, we have to have a description of this dispute. Otherwise, we would not have known it, because in each case is unique. Each case has something in it that cannot be found in the other disputes. So start with the last 3. In the Letzte Drei Plutas, in these last 3 disputes of Oif, about the bird, or Chomish, the 5th, or Zman, and time, Kemen Zagen, we could say, Lu leidem was mitzad in the Kudim Mishotefes in them. In the Ala Pluktas, from the Zelba Bala Pluktas, Mitzad Zagen, as Likkutei Azle, without, forget for a moment that these all follow the same perspective of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan. As the machlekes is nit verbunden mit der Kudana, we could possibly say that their dispute in these 3 cases is perhaps not specifically related to their original dispute of whether it's letzaref or lachalek pratim, whether we combine or we focus on the individual. Nor mit andere und besondere Time. Perhaps in these 3 cases we can say that their dispute is based on other issues. In yeder plukta lefinyan, and in each case there is something that it stands out that makes it unique and is different than the others. Now we'll go through these 3. What makes each one of these 3 unique? Aleph, by Eilas Oif, with regards to the bird offering, Ken Menzagen, we may say, as the plukta to Zevach is Koil Oif, the dispute of whether the word Zevach includes bird is totally depends, not whether we go by the community or the individual or the combination or the specifics, not in the plukta, but rather with regards to it depends on a different dispute. Whether birds need to be shechted, birds need to be slaughtered according to the Torah, other ein shchita loif, or birds do not need to be shechted. This is regarding slaughtering a bird for private consumption, not for a carbon. Although this argument, as I just said, is only with regards to profane slaughtering, meaning not for a carbon, not for an offering in the temple, when it's being brought as a carbon, everybody agrees it has to be done with the finger. The word zevach is used also with regard to slaughtering a bird for consumption. If we were to say that birds do not require shchita, therefore we cannot say that birds are included in the word zevach, even when it is used by kachim. So if we were to accept that that birds do not require shchita for personal consumption, then whenever the word zevach is used, it always means something other than birds, and birds can never be included. So it's possible that this machlekes between Rabbi Yisrael and Rabbi Yonasan has nothing to do with whether we go by the details or we go by the general, but rather whether birds require shchita or not for personal private consumption. That's why it has to be specifically listed. That's why this machlekes has to be included. Because if we wouldn't have included it, or if this would have been the only place that the machlekes is mentioned, we would have not known to apply it to other scenarios. That's the first tzrichas. Second one, beis by choimish, the 20%. In time from haisafas choimish, the reason that this penalty, this of 20%, is added by pidin von hektish when it comes to redeeming something that you pledged to the temple is mevad Rambam. Rambam explains, Yor the Torah l'seif machshavas ha'adam. Torah really knows what's going on in man's mind. Man is always looking for a good deal. So he feels that he can donate something to Hektish and then redeem it for less than its original value. And now he comes out ahead. A person will want to redeem something that he donated for less than its original value. It's a good deal. So the Torah knows exactly what's going on in every human being's mind. And therefore, the Torah added a penalty for the redemption. So now the question is, how much do you need to add? Mela kemen zagen, we can say, as the plukta is in upshatz machshavas adam. Perhaps this machlekes Rabbi Yisrael and Rabbi Yonasan is not about community or individual, but rather how much a person is going to, I don't know if we can use the word cheat hektish. How much he'll try to redeem it for less than its value. Is a fifth of the original principle enough, an actual fifth? Other means or it's not enough. In the great kite for I mentioned, we don't know, or perhaps it's not enough for a person to maybe a person will try to make it even less than that, try to redeem it for even less than that. But the comments when and therefore we have to redeem it with a quarter, with 25% of the original principle. So perhaps the machlekes between Rabbi Yisrael and Rabbi Yonasan is not about tzibur and yochid, but about how much a person will decrease from its original value in order to get a good deal. And had this been the only scenario where the machlekes is described, we would not necessarily have known to apply it to other scenarios. Gimel, the third tzrichas over here is ma. Had this been the only one, also, we could not have applied it to the others. Perhaps with time, the question is not whether we combine or we individualize. Not in the it's a question of what time actually means. What is time essentially? In the Lashon of the Ragachover, as the Ragachover would say, Tizman is mechuber mepratim. Is time a combination of details? Every moment is its own unit. Oy etzem pashut, or is time as a continuum one unit by itself, not a combination of units that then became one larger unit. Perhaps that's what the machlekes is. Perhaps it's not an issue of whether we focus on the individual or on the community, but what time actually means. So if the machlekes of Reish and Rabbi would have only been listed with regards to time, perhaps it would not have been applied. We would not have been able to apply it to the others. So in this sif, the Rebbe just explained why these three are unique, and had they been mentioned alone, we would not have been able to apply it to the others. In the next sif, the Rebbe says with the rest of them, why even if they are mentioned in other places, we still need to say them we still need to mention the machlekes between Rabbi Sheminisim in these. Yitzrichas and the erste zwei pluktas. With regard to the first two disputes, we haven't yet gotten to Karban Pesach. That comes later. By Mekalel, when a person curses his parents, is the plukta in Pirish and Signon Hakasav. The argument over here is what the word of the verse actually means. When the Torah schreibt zwei Sachen on the word Yachta, when the Torah lists two objects without saying Yachta, without saying that they have to come together, Sie meint es beide zusammen oder jeder Farsach. It's a question on what the Torah means when it lists two things without specifically saying that they come together. Does the Torah mean that both come together, or does each one have its own identity? Does Kamenit wissen von the andere Plutus? And we would not have been able to deduce this from reading this, from seeing this machlekes in other scenarios. Additionally, because over here the dispute is very, very simply, what does the Torah mean? What does the wording of the Torah mean? Additionally, da is the plukta when the Torah is mefared because of echad zwei legamre besondere inyanim. Over here the discussion is whether when the Torah in one verse itemizes two completely separate objects, or in this case, father and mother. They're two independent individuals. Nitvi keren v'chomish. Keren v'chomish, the principal and the fifth are money. It's all the same thing. Once you put them together, like I said, you can write one check for them both. Question is now, with regard to these two completely independent entities, can they be combined? Can men sagen, could we say, we might be able to say, as Agam, Rabbi Yeshua halta as in andere Fall is mitzaref, although Rabbi Yeshua says in other cases, we do combine them, aber in them Fall is manit mitzaref. In this case, we do not combine them, because they're two independent individuals. The Torah specifically says, Aviv ve'imay, father and mother, very clearly saying that they are separate. So perhaps, had we not learned this machlekes between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan, in this context, we would not have necessarily known that Rabbi Yeshua says that they should be combined. And same with Irnei Dachas. Again, the machlekes over here is with regards to a word that was said in the Torah. The Torah uses a specific word, ir, a city. So was wird angerufen ir. We were trying to now determine what is considered a city. Und wenn wird es oisir. And when does it no longer qualify as a city? Nor yechidim, whether it's considered now only individuals or a community and so on. So the same over here is with Irnei Dachas. If the machlekes would not have been listed and described with Irnei Dachas, we would not necessarily have known that they have that same opinion. Because over here, again, it could just be a debate with regard to the definition of a word. However, we could perhaps ask, this machlekes, this dispute by Irnei Dachas is similar to the dispute with regard to the bird, which also was in the period from the virtue because of zevach, which is also about the definition of a word, what zevach means. So if the dispute is described by the bird offering, then why does it have to be listed also by Irnei Dachas? And for was darf stehen, by Irnei Dachas. So the Rebbe will now explain this. Is Neusef al Hanal as by Zevach Yeshloimer does is totally Yesh Chita Loif Min HaTorah. In addition to the fact that we just said earlier that what's unique about a bird is that it could perhaps depend on the debate whether or not birds require shechita for private consumption. In addition to that, Yeshloimer by Irnei Dachas is da chidush v'chiluk bedin. There is something unique with regards to the law of Irnei Dachas within the concept of tzibur, of a community itself. There's something unique with Irnei Dachas, that there's asara, meir, rubi, shoshevet, there's 10, 100, majority of a tribe, and so on. So there are details within the Ir Nidachas that do not correlate to the details in other scenarios, and that's why it had to be very clearly described here too. Perhaps we could have said that that in this scenario, when Ir Nidachas Rabbi Yeshua concedes to Rabbi Yonasan that fame in Meir in an ear, that even more than 100 is still a city, because a city also does have some qualities of being a tzibur. Had this not been all about whether you count individuals or you count the community, and perhaps in this case, Rabbi Yeshua would have followed Rabbi Yonasan's opinion. Or the flip side could be true too. Perhaps Rabbi Yonasan is made the Rabbi Yeshua. Maybe Rabbi Yonasan concedes to Rabbi Yeshua because there are indeed certain scenarios where 10 people are still counted as individuals and are not combined. There are scenarios in halacha. So it's not 100% clear what their opinions would have been had we not clearly said that they have the same opinions as they do in other places. Thus, was Rabbi Yeshua held by Mekalel with regards to cursing a parent. When Rabbi Yeshua says, that we do combine two details, two specific, unique individuals. In the case of Mekalel, it's the father and the mother, two unique independent individuals. It is nicht nur when beide Pratim sein von selben Zug. Not only does this apply this applies not only when they are both in the same category. Because even though the father and mother are separate individuals, they still fall into the same category of Avi ve'imoi. They're your parents. This could, Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, could also apply to a scenario where these two independent entities belong to separate and different categories. Now the Rebbe is going to show us another scenario, another situation where Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan's dispute is applied as well. Thus, from another dispute, we can also see how this also applied in a scenario where these two unique entities are combined, even though they're from different categories. Ma'arvin likramis. Oy ein ma'arvin likramis. So in the karbanos, in the offerings of Yom Kippur, one of the steps of the service is that blood of the offerings are sprinkled on the corners of the altar of the Mizbeach. There are two separate offerings over here. The Torah says you take the blood of the ox, umidam hasoyer, and the blood of the goat, and those are the two bloods that are sprinkled on the altar on the Mizbeach. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, that the bloods were mixed together, and then together this mixture is sprinkled on the corners of the altar. Again, Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. But Rabbi Yonasan says no, they're not combined. You sprinkle this blood first, and then you sprinkle the other blood first. Then you sprinkle the other blood. Separately, they're not mixed together. So Ma'arv in the Quran says, do you combine the bloods to sprinkle them on the corners or not? Their power from Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim is a carbon yachid. Now this ox that the Kohen Gadol offered, the first offering, is a personal offering. It's his own personal private offering on their sire. But the goat is Asher La'am, is an offering for the community, for the nation. A carbon tzibur, it's a communal offering. Nevertheless, although they are completely different categories, Rabbi Yeshua says that they are combined. Noch achidush in Ma'arvin l'kranas of Mekalel. There's something else that's unique to this situation, to the context of this mixing of the blood over the scenario of cursing a parent. Again, the scenario of cursing the parent is that they're two separate entities, but they're in the same category. Over here, they're in different categories. Something else that's unique over here, it does was Rabbi Yeshua zakt by Mekalel. As lulei dem limud miyuchad veis menor kilal avi v'imoy. When Rabbi Yeshua says that had we not had this extra line in the verse, we would have assumed that you have to curse your parents together. It doesn't mean that they have to be cursed at the same moment. In the Zalban Dibur, in one expression. Even if it happened one after the other. And the Chiddush from Pasuk is afilo aviv other email lane is mechayev. And then the verse concludes, as we've established, that you don't even need that, but even each one by itself, without cursing the other one, also makes a person liable. But without that, when we assume that perhaps you have to curse them both together, it doesn't mean actually together. At the same moment, it could also be one after the other. The phrase the Lotzaref, when Rabbi Yeshua wants to combine them, in them fal means beida aviv unime, means both the father and the mother. But it can also mean one after the other. And then when the Torah does divide them into individuals, it means only one. But there's never a requirement or never even an assumption that they have to be done together. When it comes to sprinkling the blood on the altar, everybody agrees that both have to be sprinkled on the altar. Question is only the plukta is their dispute is timiz ma'arvin, do we combine them, and therefore they're both sprinkled on the altar together at the same moment. Other is or they are sprinkled one after the other. First the ox's blood and then the goat's blood. When the fire is and that's the unique aspect in Rabbi Yeshua's opinion with regards to sprinkling the blood. Over here, they're actually combined together, and we don't find that in any other scenario that these two completely separate categories are mixed together. So that was the unique aspect of Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, and in Rabbi Yonasan's opinion, there's also a unique aspect. Kanal is there carbon tzibur. This goat is a communal offering. And the far is the asvara to sagen as lekul alma eich Rabbi Yonasan is memtzar zum tzibur soyer nach hayachid par. We could have said, we don't because Rabbi Yonasan very clearly says not. But had he not said it, we could have assumed that because the goat represents the community, and the par, the ox, represents an individual, you can just add the individual offering to the goat's offering. It's just adding another individual to the community, and Rabbi Yonasan would have been fine with that, perhaps. And that's why we have to say his opinion very clearly that he doesn't believe that. Ashenkin by Makal, however, with regard to cursing a parent who is sai of his yichidim, they're both individuals. We don't have one of them considered a community and one of them considered an individual. They're both two individuals. So Rabbi Yonasan would never concede that they should be combined. And now we have the final dispute between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan, and then we're going to go back to Korban Pesach. Another dispute between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yonasan, whether both are two entities are combined to one, or each entity is viewed on its own. By Gadol Abal Ktana, with regards to an adult who has relations with a minor, specifically a minor who he would not have been allowed to marry had she been an adult or another situation. So the Torah says, both of them have to die. And the Gemara says, they both have to be equal. Which means that they both have to be liable, be able to be put to death. That's Rabbi Yeshua. Because the child is not ever going to be liable for death. You can never put a child to death. The man himself is put to death. So Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is that because they both need to be liable in order to be able to put the man to death, and in this case the child is never going to be liable, the man is also not put to death. Rabbi Yonasan says that just because the woman is not, the child is not liable, the man can still be put to death. Rabbi Yeshua is up as a chiyuv misa. Rabbi Yeshua says that this death penalty, when the Torah says that they should be put to death, depends on them both being combined together. And therefore they must both be able to be put to death. And in this case, they're not. Rabbi Yonasan says that they're not combined. Their chiyuv misa is of yeder and bazunder. Each one individually becomes liable for death. Each one on its own. And therefore, because the child cannot be put to death, the man's penalty still stands and he can still be put to death. The Sichos in der Plukte. Why is this machlekes again? Sichos, why does it need to be described? Like Pirush Rashi in the Sugi. So we understand this according to Rashi's explanation on this discussion in the Talmud. Haktana is nit shavet to agadol ba'inshim. A child is not an adult's equal when it comes to consequences and punishments. Haktana is nit shavet to agadol ba'inshim. It's not that a child is not an adult's equal. Nor does he need begeder anshin. She's never even within the category of ever being punished. So it's not that they're equal but different. They're on a completely different plane. When the fire Voltman can Zalmanov, we could have said, as in them follows Rabbi Yeshua made to Rabbi Innocent. So perhaps in this case, Rabbi Yeshua would have conceded to Rabbi Innocent. Although they aren't both liable, like the Chiyuv from Gadol, there would still be a requirement to put this adult to death. Because the reason the child over here is not being put to death is it's not hepech from the Tziruf Shneim Kechad. It is not the opposite of combining them together. This is not something that can ever be combined. The two need to be somewhat combinable. That's had this machlokes not been listed. But because the machlokes is listed, we see that Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion that even these two components that seemingly are uncombinable are combined to the extent that the adult is not put to death. The Chidush was done in the Plukte by Pesach. So now back to Korban Pesach. After all said and done, Korban Pesach was what we started with. And after having said that the Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Innocent's dispute apply to all of these 7 other scenarios, what is unique about Korban Pesach? Was the fire coming up learning from the andere Plutus and all, so that Korban Pesach still requires us to describe this dispute between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Innocent in the Sifri, and we can't rely on what it says on their dispute in the other scenarios. Vigeret Frier Baruch, as we said earlier in detail. Is Lakuli Almat Korban Pesach and sich beide gedar, and Korban Pesach contains within it both aspects, Saif and Tzibur and Saif and Yachid, both communal and individual. Und der Riber, Voltman can sagen, we could have said, as in them fall, as Rabbi Yeshua made to Rabbi Innocent. Rabbi Yeshua perhaps concedes to Rabbi Innocent, as this is not an angel Tzibur, that over here Korban Pesach is not a real communal offering. Or vice versa. As Ken Zain, perhaps as Rabbi Innocent is made to Rabbi Yeshua, perhaps Rabbi Innocent concedes to Rabbi Yeshua, as is it an Yachid, that it's not a real individual personal offering. Because we have both aspects, Korban Pesach has within it both components, either one could have perhaps conceded to the other. The Indian Anal and Korban Pesach, as a Sad Gedorim from Yachid and Tzibur, this fact that Korban Pesach has within it both individual and communal aspects. We will understand it now more with an explanation of what tzibur, what community actually means. Which can be viewed from 2 perspectives. Aleph, first of all, it's very bottled the metzias von Yachidim. The individual's existence becomes nullified, and they create a new existence. They create a new unit, a new body. It's now a community. Similar to the entity of an individual. So before you had an individual in this body, and now when all the bodies came together, their individual existences now no longer exist. And now you have a new body, a new entity, a new unit, which is called tzibur. Or the other perspective is tzibur meint metzias achas legamri. Tzibur does not mean one cohesive body. Nor that tzibur fun ribu yichidim. It's a combination of many individuals. There still are individuals. With regards to doing a mitzvah in large groups, the Torah says that it causes a great honor to the king. But if everything was one unit, then what honor is it? It's still just one unit. But because this one unit is actually comprised of many unique individuals, that's what makes it special. In that case, they don't become one unit, one existence. We still want to focus on the multitude. The greater the multitude, the greater the honor for the king is. So either we can look at a tzibur, either we look at a community as the nullification of the individuals and the creation of a new unit, or we say that the individual retains his identity, and now the tzibur is a combination, it is a mixture of everybody together. That's what the tzibur with regards to Korban Pesach is. Es ist nicht kein Korban tzibur, wo der Klali soll wird ein Metzias. It doesn't mean that all of Israel, all Jews now become one unit. Nor wo alle Eden, but rather all Jews, the tzibur, the community, bleiben am Metzias von Ribu Yechidim. They remain individuals, many individuals, but they remain individuals. Or as we said earlier, there has to be 3 groups. But there's always going to be a division. There's always going to be some type of breakdown within the tzibur. Perhaps we can say that Tanam Pnimi for Korban Pesach hat bei sich beide Inyanim. Why specifically this Korban Pesach? Of all aspects in Torah, why is Korban Pesach the one thing that has within it both aspects of Yachid and Tzibur? Pesach is this man Haleida von Am Yisrael. Pesach represents the birth of the Jewish people. Und derfar drücken sich aus in Korban Pesach die zwei ktzavezike tchunas, was der Am Yisrael hat in sich. And therefore, Korban Pesach is that one scenario that expresses these 2 opposing natures within, or characteristics of the Jewish people. Alle Eden seine vereinigt in ein Metzias von der Tzibur. All Jews are united as one unit, as a Tzibur. Akoy ma'achas shlema, one body. Le'idach, but on the other hand, there is farzich an olam male. Every individual retains his identity as a whole world. 2 extreme opposites. On one hand, we say that we're all together as one, and at the same time, we say that everybody is his own individual. Der Mit ist moving for was der Inyan von Tzibur in Korban Pesach hat sich erst aufgetan in Pesach Midbar. Because Korban Pesach represents the birth of the Jewish people, that's why it expresses this unique characteristic of the Jewish people, that we have these 2 opposites within us. But when did it come to fruition? When was it actually expressed? Only when the Jews were in the desert. Although their actual birth occurred when they left Egypt, by Jews, when did they actually become a tzibur? When did they actually become a community? That happened later, by Matan Torah, when they received the Torah. When the Jews camped in front of the mountain, like one unit, like one man. That's when that was accomplished. When was the true tzibur accomplished? When was the true communal aspect of the Jewish people realized? When they came to Mount Sinai, after they left Egypt. But while they were still in Egypt, they were primarily yechidim, they were primarily individuals. Von deswegen is euch in Mitzrayim gewend im Inyan von Akrabas Pesach, but there still was a Korban Pesach in Egypt. And noch mehr, more than just being a Korban Pesach, kama v'kama halachas, many of the laws from Pesach Deires that apply to Korban Pesach in the future, werden abgelernt von dem, was steht bei Pesach Mitzrayim. We learn those laws from what the Torah says with regards to the Korban Pesach that they did in Egypt. That says, as Pesach Mitzrayim is the Rosh V'Yesod, the Korban Pesach that was offered in Egypt is the beginning, it's the foundation for the Shpeter de Kipsachim from all future Korban Pesachs. Weil das, was es ist, was Am Yisrael is Shpeter, Beis Matan Torah, geworden am Metzias von Tzibur. When the Jews became a community at Mount Sinai, when they received the Torah, is in an Eifen was the Metzias, is an Eifen was the Metzias, und Chashivus von Yachid, was his Mudgash in Pesach Mitzrayim Canal. That's through highlighting the importance of each individual, which again occurred when they observed the Korban Pesach in Egypt. Verdurch dem nidbatel. We don't nullify the existence and the identity of each individual. Nor bleibt euch nach dem Metzias. Every individual retains his identity. So we started off with doing Korban Pesach in Egypt, where every individual did it on his own. Then we did Korban Pesach in the desert, where we did it together as a community. And the 2 are combined to highlight that even once the Jews became a community and one unit, one body at Mount Sinai, we never lost our individual identities. As a side note, we can also infer that while the Jews were in Egypt, they also did have an element of community. Because read itself in Medrash, as is described in the Medrash, and we learned in earlier Sichos, as Kol Yisrael, from Pischa Shal Moshe, that all Jews actually did eat part of Moshe's Korban Pesach. So they all ate from the same Korban Pesach. That implies that it did have an element of community. But what time is the Pesach? There is, since the first Korban Pesach in Egypt was the foundation for all future Korban Pesachs, there had to be within it, or at least within the Korban Pesach of the leader of the generation of Me'ain from Yinat Tzibur, had to have somewhat of a communal aspect to it. So even though primarily when they were in Egypt there was a Korban Yachid, there was an individual offering, but there still was an element of community in Egypt. At the Likkutei, this point, that the community aspect does not nullify the individual aspect of the Jews. This is also reflected in all the general communal offerings, not just the Korban Pesach. Although they are purchased through communal funds. It has to be very clearly designated for the community. The money that you donate to be brought to the temple to be used for communal offerings needs to be very specifically designated for the community, so that it no longer belongs to the individual. Nevertheless, in these daily communal offerings, every individual's part in it will always still be there. It's never completely nullified. As our sages say, often pasuk on the verse with regards to Korach v'Hadassah, when Korach and his cohorts were rebelling against Moshe, Moshe tells God, "Al tefen el minchasam," do not accept their offering. What does that mean? I know, Moshe says, I know that every Jew has a part in the daily offerings by virtue of them donating, by them giving them achtis shekel, to have shekel for the offerings. But I beseech of you that Moshe says to God, I beg that you should not accept their portion within the Korban Tamid. Nachmer, additionally, their din is, as I feel, so with regard to Korach, we see that although everybody made a donation, it was still and was completely absorbed by the communal fund. Nevertheless, every person still retains a part in the daily offering. Nachmer, der din is as I feel of an ayachid from the tzibur wird gewogen gegen dem tzibur. Another halacha is that when one individual is weighed against the community, is menit mevater af an yachid tzilidem tzibur. We do not give up on the individual in favor of the community. Specifically with the Psakim Rambam, as the Rambam rules in halacha. Im amru lehem akum, if non-Jews tell the community, tnu lanu echad mikem, give us one of you, v'nahargenu, and we'll kill him. V'im lav, and if you don't give us one individual, nahareg kulchem, we will kill all of you. So it's one life versus the entire community. Rambam says, Yehorgu kulam, they should all allow themselves to be killed, while yimseru lahem nefesh achas misrael, we should not give over to them even one Jewish person. It says Hagam as tzibur is machriyas hayachid. Although generally the community does outweigh the individual, kenas abadit mevatel zayin the mitzias from yachid. It still will never completely nullify the identity and the existence of the individual. So even when there is this concept of community, where this new cohesive unit that came to be at Mount Sinai, every individual Jew still retains his identity, his own personal identity. And as this is with regard to community, Klolos Am Yisrael, the general Jewish nation. And the same applies also to every individual. Each individual also is expected to approach this from both perspectives. As Hillel said and is described in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, Allah, first of all, imeina nili mili. First of all, if I am not for myself, who is for me? But then he adds, ukshani la'atzmi mani. But once I am for myself, what am I? It is a metzius von hayachid. You have your own identity. You're an individual. Ani li, I am for myself. Und zusammen der mit, but at the same time, is there a tale from Klal Yisrael? You have to remember that you are a part of the Jewish nation. And if you forget that you're part of the Jewish nation, then you're nothing. But if I'm just for myself, then what am I? With that in mind, as these two characteristics are expressed specifically in Carbon Pesach, we can explain Hillel's above mentioned statement. We can explain it colloquially with regard specifically to Pesach. Although we cannot say, as Hillel is given their minhag, that they had the custom to learn in Pirkei Avos ben Pesach l'Shavuos. So there's this custom that we have to learn Pirkei Avos, one chapter every Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuos, the 6 chapters, the 6 Shabbosim between Pesach and Shavuos. So obviously, this custom did not exist in the times of Hillel. Nevertheless, since Torah is eternal, including also customs that the Jewish people instituted, which are as valuable and as strong as Torah itself, we must say, as their Maimer von Hillel, this is in the edition, this is in Perek Rishon, this statement of Hillel, which is listed in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, relates specifically to the first Shabbos that follows Pesach. What's that connection? The Habir, the explanation is, the Rabbi said earlier, which means colloquially. It's not the actual pshat, it's not the actual meaning of Hillel's teaching, but it's a very important lesson regardless. As we said earlier, Hillel was the one who ruled as Pesach is the Shabbos, that the Carbon Pesach overrides Shabbos. And as we discussed, is das mit the Pesach hat together from Carbon Tzibur, the Carbon Pesach has qualifies as a communal offering. Und die Gemara is dort Messiah, and then the Gemara concludes in the discussion about Hillel and Bnei B'Seira. As das hat gebracht, as mit Nemane given Hillel as Nasi. By Hillel remembering the law and teaching this law, that caused him to be appointed as the Nasi, as the leader, and to replace Bnei B'Seira. Learned when gleich noch Pesach, right after Pesach. So Pesach is when this thing happened, when this event between the Hillel and Bnei B'Seira occurred. Right after Pesach, we opened up Pirkei Avos. Right after Hillel became the leader, right after Hillel became a leader, we read his first teaching. Was his Bekeshes to Carbon Pesach and how it relates specifically to Carbon Pesach, which caused him to become the leader. What's this first teaching? First teaching of Hillel that we learned right after we learned that he became the leader. First thing is, if I am not for myself, who is for me? The Carbon Pesach is a Carbon B'Yachid. The basis of the Carbon Pesach is that it is a personal offering. Medarvus allein bring, and every individual needs to bring it on his own. Von Mom and Yachid has to be brought with your own money. Un limnuyav, and only members are allowed to partake in it. Get sold very of them. Only members can be included in it. That's imein anili mili. But on the other hand, shani lats me money. But if I am only for myself, then what am I? And muzhab together from Carbon Tzibur, you must also have this aspect of it being a communal offering. If all you cared about was yourself, was the individual, then the Carbon Pesach would not have overridden Shabbos. And therefore, Hillel would never have become appointed leader. Mani. He's talking about himself. What am I? If not for this rule and a reminder that every individual still has to be part of the community, then I, Hillel, would have never become the leader, because then my teaching that Carbon Pesach is a communal offering would not have been applicable. Kamen fragen, but we can still ask, again, colloquially, der Carbon Pesach is an inyan shel tzibur. Even if we were to say that Carbon Pesach is or does have some aspects of a communal offering, Moses the Chaban the Tanai from Kavua's Mana if Shabbos. We said that the only way a communal offering overrides Shabbos is if it's required to occur on that day. Can also be basis, we said earlier. So Zogt Hillel, so that's Hillel's final statement over here. If you don't do it now, when will you do it? Carbon Pesach is Kavua's man. If you don't listen, the Carbon Pesach must be offered on the 14th of Nisan. So that's the end of the discussion on Carbon Pesach. Now, just as this applies to each individual, this applies also to our love for our fellow, specifically our love for our fellow like ourselves. Says Yadua, it is known as the Inyan von Ahavas Yisrael to welche Eden es soll nur sein. Loving your fellow Jew, regardless of who he is mitzadem was called ish Yisrael ish echad chaverim, is because every Jew is like one with his fellow Jew. With the Alter Rebbe is Masber, as the Alter Rebbe explains, as alle Eden sein wie ish echad mechuber me'evarim rabim, all Jews are like one person comprised of many limbs. And there's different ways to view this concept. Yeah, there it is a tale from Klal Yisrael. First of all, every Jew is a part of the general congregation of Israel. As the sages say with regards to Matan Torah, had there been even one Jew missing the Torah at Matan Torah at Mount Sinai, God would not have revealed himself to them. And called Tainus Shema B'Yishim Yisrael, any fast with when there's a tragedy among the Jewish people and the community fasts, even if the greatest sinner is missing from this fast, it's not counted. But thus is it's not because the individual's value, nor does it that it's ain't from the cloud, but it's because without him the entire congregation or there's a detail missing from the general bigger picture. That's one perspective. The other perspective is as jeder is hat a protestische Meile, was die Meile is mashlim de klal. Every individual actually does have specific value through which he complements everybody else. As Alter Rebbe explains, as a frana mile in the regular frosh, the foot actually has a value over the head. Although generally the head is on top and the foot is on bottom, and yes, it's all part of one body, but the foot can do things that the head cannot do. The foot can walk and the head cannot walk. So from that perspective, you can actually refer to the foot as a head in that context. Nevertheless, although the individual's value is what's being highlighted here now, it's not about him being himself, nor but rather how he complements the bigger picture. And to use the example of the head and the foot again, yes, the head can do something without the foot, or yes, the foot can do something without the head, and therefore it has an advantage over the head, but without the head, the foot is also meaningless. You need to have both together. You need to have the foot and the head in order for the head to realize its value and for the foot to realize its value. Each one has its own value, but they have to come together. But then when it comes to Ahavas Yisrael, when it comes to loving your fellow Jew, the Alter Rebbe says, "Is there nit mistabek mit den Sorgen as kol masim as av echad l'cholono v'lchein nikra kol Yisrael achem?" He says it's not enough to just say that we have one father and therefore we're all considered brothers. But it is makdim. He adds one more perspective to this concept of Ahavas Yisrael. V'hanefesh v'haruach, the spirit, mi yodeya. Who knows how great they actually are, in their source, within the living God. That means you love every Jew because of his value as an individual. Not because he's a part of the bigger picture. When it gets to and therefore he completes the general picture of the Jewish people. That's important. But that's not why we love every Jew. We love every Jew because of his individual value, because of who he is. And that love is kamoicha mamish. You have to love that person like yourself. Just like you love the limbs of one body. Even though each one has to be its own independent limb, they're all part of the same body. That's how you can love someone like yourself, because when the head loves the foot, he's not loving something different. He's loving himself. Und der Fahr, therefore, euch in dem Ort was herzlich Eliezer in Prati from dem Aver. Therefore, even when you only recognize the value of one limb, nitver is mashtim kolos aguf, not as it is part of the bigger picture and complements the rest of the body. Even within that own specific individual limb, you feel and you recognize the value of all the other limbs. And that is that they're all part of one body. Not the specific value of everyone, but the fact that you're all actually one. Through engaging in loving our fellows like ourselves, loving a fellow Jew as we just described. God Himself, Re'acha, which when the Torah says Re'acha can also refer to Zakadosh Baruch Hu, God Himself. God will express His love to the Jewish people. God will redeem us from exile in the Beidei Fanim Anal, also in these two aspects. First of all, Aleph, every single individual Jew will be collected, each person individually. As Rashi says that Hashem, God, takes your hand, every single Jew's hand, from Galus, every Jew is individually and independently led out of exile. And God Himself again, who is our fellow. God Himself also leaves exile. When the Jews leave exile, when they are redeemed, God is redeemed with us. Every individual together with God Himself. And that's the first component. And the second component of the redemption is all Jews will be united in this great congregation who will return in the ultimate and final complete redemption. May it happen in our time.